Lokati here. Today we are going over the update to our Witch Wander leveling guide. Many players will want to continue building the character as an elementalist, and I will be making a guide for that, but I really prefer taking advantage of Occultist defenses, Profane Bloom for massive clear, and just overall better survivability. Now this build is viable as Kinetic Blast of Clustering, as well as the new Kinetic Rain skill. I may need to do some updates for it with Kinetic Rain once we get more info on the skill itself so that we can kind of maximize that. For now, let's take a look at the Occultist Wander. And we'll load this thing up. Let's do like 100% Delirious map. And let's grab Breach Fragments. That's good enough. So this is... Alright, so this is the build, Sans Mercenary, in the current league, with most of the gear that's just in the POE. Obviously, we'll have a little bit less energy shield, because Whispers is going to be limited to 100. But this is 100% Delirious, Jungle Valley, full Breach, full everything, just to give you an idea of like speed, clear. Survivability, etc. The playstyle is pretty straightforward. I mean, you're just spamming Kinetic Blast. We have a Despair on hit that we can run. We also have a self-cast Despair. The self-cast Despair is strictly for having a larger Despair for like giga tanky targets like bosses, etc. Like there's a Breach boss, but it's dead already. We didn't even get a chance to Despair it. It's super fast, which I really like. We unfortunately got the stupid Headhunter ambush. But it's really tanky. We have ES on hit, and we're hitting like a few hundred times a second. And then we also have ES Leech, and a huge amount of ES Leech. And then we have block and ES on block. So like recovery on the build is insane. And then you're going to be running somewhere between 9 and 10k base energy shield. So should be able to recover from every major hit outside of a one-shot. There's another Breach boss. Oh, that was a Beyond boss. Obviously, 4 or 5 breaches running at a time is a little FPS intensive. We're running Kinetic Blast of Clustering on this build because Kinetic Blast is way too much for this PC, so I don't run Kinetic Blast. I get like 1 FPS with Kinetic Blast. Clustering does about the same damage, it just does it with less projectiles on the screen. And less projectiles on the screen mean more FPS. Of course, boss dead. And so Kinetic Blast of Clustering works, Kinetic Rain will work, regular Kinetic Blast works. build flies. Now let's take a look at the POB. The POB is going to be broken up into 4 sections: low budget, mid to high, and high budget. There is no divine orb setting like grouping for this. Low budget is just the lowest budget that the build functions the way I intended. I have no idea what these are going to cost. We don't know what Whispers is going to cost. Whispers is in the mid budget, mid high, and then the high budget is mostly crafted gear. So we don't know what the prices on these items are going to be yet, but we can guarantee that Void Battery is going to be reasonable. Light of Lunaris is going to be reasonable. Shadows of Dust, Skyforth, and Chaperones are always cheap. And then Healthy Mind is relatively cheap, but you can just corrupt into a Healthy Mind typically fairly easily. So this is how we're going to have the budget set up. We're going to look at each one separately. So we'll look at low budget first. Low budget is going to be utilizing either a Void Battery wand or a good attack wand. Light of Lunaris is just a cheap entry to a good ES shield that gives us damage. We're going to run a Lich's Circlet for ES and resistances and dex. We're going to run a Regalia for ES, resistances, and attributes. We're going to run a Shadows and Dust for access to Rampage, which is very strong for the build, as well as crit multi. We're going to run Skyforth for some additional mana reservation, and power charge on crit, which is very important. We want an amulet to give us accuracy, spell damage, ES, resistances, stats that we need. We want a Cerulean Ring for mana, as well as resistances, intelligence, accuracy, stats that we need, things like that. We want to run a Chaperones in the right ring slot so that we can gain access to the regenerate energy shield per second and the maximum mana. This also means that we cannot regenerate mana. We are relying on mana leech for recovery, which we have more than enough of. But you could have times where you accidentally spend too much mana and then don't have enough to trigger the attack. When that happens, your wand will still manually attack, which is going to hit. It's going to do damage because we have a lot of generic damage scaling. And then that's going to trigger your mana leech and get your mana back again. So this is a right ring slot on the Chaperones here. On our belt, we want mana, energy shield, resistances, attributes we need. We're running a granite flask, a jade flask, a diamond flask, and a silver flask, as well as a Rummy's concoction here. If you are having any mana issues at all, the jade flask or the granite flask can be replaced with a mana flask to help out with that. On our jewels, we want energy shield, resistances, attributes we need, accuracy, energy shield, mana, crit, things like that, and then a healthy mind for more max mana. Mana scaling, it works with KB of clustering, which is what we have set up in this build. If you are not running KB of clustering and you're not running mana, you're only going to get mana scaling off of Prodigal Perfection, which is 2% increased spell damage per mana up to 40%. So once you have 4,000 mana, you don't need to scale mana any longer until you get a Whispers. And then Whispers picks up with chaos damage mana scaling after that. And so this is how we're going to have everything set up in our low budget build. Our passive tree is going to be as such, and this is pretty straightforward. We are coming around here and taking all these nodes as we go across. And so Foresight for energy shield, a Harrier for attack speed and move speed, so on and so forth as we move across the tree. Now this tree is going to vary pretty significantly from the leveling tree, so there will be a respec necessary. The main reason that we are snaking around like this is because later budgets in the build are going to utilize a cluster jewel, which gives us access to split personality for some attribute requirements. Some things to note here is you will need sovereignty for your mana reservation. We do want to take advantage of getting this node right here for Arcane Guardian and Shield Mastery. We are going to need Ghost Reaver because Energy Leech support got nerfed. So we're going to want to have some form of Life Leech conversion to Energy Shield Leech, which we get through Ghost Reaver down here. Healthy Mind comes in here and gives us a ton of mana, and it is very important for our mana scaling on the build as well. For our skills, Sniper's Mark with Mark on Hit. We probably don't need Enhance in the low budget version of the build. Self-cast Despair until you can get a Shadows and Dust with a Despair on Hit corruption. which should be cheap and relatively accessible. And then after that, Despair is only going to be used against large targets for a higher level Despair. Kinetic Blast of Clustering with Fork, Sacred Wisps, increased critical damage, Vicious Proj, and Void Manipulation. We obviously want Awakened Fork at the end because that is massive amounts of improvement on the clear. But in the low budget, you can just use a regular Fork, regular Void Manipulation, regular Vicious Proj, increased crit damage, and Sacred Wisps. For our auras, we're running Purity of Elements, Discipline, Tempest Shield, and Precision. I just want to point out that Purity of Elements, if you're running, where is it? We don't have it in the build anywhere. If you are running the Mana Reservation node, that is going to dump Purity of Elements on your target, make them immune to shocks, and that will reduce your overall damage. Also give them a ton of energy shield from Discipline. So we don't want to run the Rune Graft that causes enemies to take your auras. We don't need it in the build either, but just something to note. Shield Charge with faster attacks for movement, along with a Flame Dash. And then Frenzy is how we're going to maintain our Frenzy charges in the low budget version of the build. We do have 100% charge duration, so these Frenzy charges last 20 seconds. You only have to hit Frenzy once every 20 seconds. It's very low maintenance to keep that up. We are running Tornado with Spellslinger because that is important for maintaining our clear. And then our single target is going to be based on our proximity in the low budget. You are going to have to stand relatively close to the target because we need to hit them with the projectile, whereas Tornado is going to maintain our clear. And so you are going to have to stand relatively close to single targets to get a lot of DPS out of the low budget version of the build. In later versions of the build, we are running Split Shot with chance for extra fork projectile, and then the projectile hits the tornado and then flies through the tornado on the extra projectile to hit the single target. So proximity doesn't matter in the later budgets of the build, but in the lower budget of the build, that is very important. Immortal Call with maximum damage taken is one of our defensive layers, and that's how we're going to get set up on the low budget version of the build. On the mid budget version of the build, we're going to pick up things like Crown of the Inward Eye and Whispers of Infinity. These are going to be huge bonuses to our damage, as well as Lethal Pride for more damage and solving some of our stat requirements. And then again, Cluster Jewels with Split Personalities and Unnatural Instinct, all to scale our damage and relieve some pressure from our gear, allowing us to use more higher damage gear. Now you can see there's a huge jump in damage, 3.5 million DPS on average to 17 million DPS between the low and the mid budget. So all of these upgrades are pretty critical. Whispers of Infinity is the largest single upgrade, and I understand that this is possibly locked behind Uber versions of the boss and could have a low drop rate, and so this could become expensive to acquire, but this is critical to truly scale the build. You can see if we're not running Whispers of Infinity, we lose half of our damage on the build, and so this is going to be one of the more important things that you want to acquire to really get the build scaling up. Our skills are going to be almost identical going down, so not a lot of changes in our skills, just small changes to our skills. And our passive tree is largely unchanged, just the addition of the clusters, the split personality, and the additional jewels to get us scaling, as well as our impossible escape for split shot and multi-shot. And so the mid-budget really helps to scale the build up pretty significantly. Mid to high budget really is the inclusion of Nimmies and Headhunter for massively scaling our single target with Return Proj and massively scaling our clear with Headhunter buffs. And then in the high budget build, we're going to shift over to more of an intelligence stacker version of the build, which gets us access to a ton more ES on the build. And so the high budget build is going to do more damage than the mid to high budget build. You're looking at 17 million to 30 million, so about double the damage, but really double the survivability on the build, moving up into the high budget version of the build. Now from here, you're going to do traditional intelligence scaling, so this would shift more away, going beyond the high budget would shift more away from mana on the tree and running 12 slot attribute stacking cluster jewels instead of the ones that we have listed in here. Now we have on these cluster jewels opportunistic fusillade and martial prowess. These are not, I repeat, not requirements for the build. These are a little bit annoying to craft. You can use any large cluster jewel that has damage that benefits your character. So the biggest point of the large cluster jewels are to give you access to these additional jewels. You can use martial prowess. You can use feed the fury. Does not have to be opportunistic fusillade. This does not have to be a wand cluster jewel. Could be a damage with shields. Could be an attack cluster jewel. You have a lot of options. Don't feel too constrained at running only martial prowess, opportunistic fusillade. These are just the best ones that are out there. A lot of the other ones are going to be good within 1% of the damage done. So just keep an eye out for good ones. As far as survivability goes, we're relatively survivable at all levels of the build, with higher tiers of the build being more and more survivable as you go up. Recovery comes through either ES Leech or Watcher's Eye, Energy Shield on hit, or Energy Shield recovery on block, and very high spell block and block chances. And so tankiness on the build feels very good. Clear on the build is amazing. Single target on the build is a little lackluster at the lower budgets, but scales up better once you get into the higher budgets. And the mid to high budget clears regular bosses and uber bosses fairly easily. Now, if you have any questions over the build, as for the Ascendancy nodes, we are going Unholy Authority so that we have access to a mark and a curse on the target. We are going Profane Bloom because everyone likes clearing entire screens. We're going Vile Bastion because this is a tremendous amount of increased max energy shield for our high chance to block, as well as immunity to stuns while we have energy shield. And we are going Forbidden Power because we are scaling damage through power charges, and an extra power charge, area of effect, and damage is phenomenal. This also gives us power charges on spending mana on the low budget build, but we'll rely on Skyforth for generating the power charges later on in the build. Now, if you have any questions over the build, drop a comment down below or come by YouTube. I'm absolutely happy to answer them anytime. This is a build that is going to see some changes, especially if Kinetic Rain proves to be significantly better than Kinetic Blast or Kinetic Blast of clustering. And so we will be updating the POB as we go. Thank y'all very much. Thank you very much for watching. If you enjoyed this content, please like, subscribe, drop a comment down below. As a reminder, I'm happy to offer one-on-one support for any of my builds. Just come by Twitch during any live stream time. Thank you very much. Peace.